The truth is rarely hidden because people are evil or intentionally deceptive. Most of the time, the truth is buried under fear. Fear of consequences, fear of judgment, fear of losing control, fear of being seen as weak, exposed, or imperfect. When you understand this, your entire approach to truth-seeking changes. You stop interrogating and start observing. You stop pushing and start listening. Human beings are not designed to lie comfortably. They lie defensively. The mind lies to protect identity, safety, and social standing. When someone withholds the truth, they are often protecting a version of themselves they believe is necessary for survival in that moment. Recognizing this immediately gives you leverage, not power over them, but clarity within yourself. And clarity is always the first step to truth. People do not hide the truth equally in all situations. Context matters more than character. The same person who is radically honest in one environment may become evasive in another. Power dynamics, perceived authority, emotional stakes, and time pressure all shape honesty. When the cost of truth feels higher than the cost of deception, the mind naturally chooses concealment. This is not a moral failure. It is a psychological reflex. Understanding this prevents you from taking dishonesty personally. The moment you take it personally, your ego becomes involved, and ego clouds perception. Calm perception is your greatest asset. Truth does not respond well to force, but it reveals itself in the presence of psychological safety and disciplined awareness. One of the biggest mistakes people make when trying to extract truth is believing that talking more will get them there faster. In reality, the opposite is often true. Silence is uncomfortable, and discomfort reveals truth. When you fill silence with words, you give the other person time to construct a better story. When you allow silence to stretch, you force the nervous system to respond honestly. The body reacts faster than the mind can edit. Breathing changes, posture shifts, micro-expressions flicker. These are not signs of guilt. They are signs of internal processing. Truth-seeking is not about catching someone lying. It is about noticing when their internal world and external words fall out of alignment. Before you ever try to get the truth out of someone else, you must regulate yourself. An agitated mind cannot detect subtle cues. If you feel urgency, anger, or impatience, you have already lost precision. Emotional restraint is not weakness. It is tactical intelligence. When you are calm, you become non-threatening, and when you are non-threatening, people reveal more than they intend to. The human nervous system constantly scans for danger. If you signal judgment, dominance, or hostility, the system goes into defense mode. Defense mode produces rehearsed answers. Calm produces access. This is why experienced interrogators, negotiators, and observers appear almost relaxed. They understand that truth emerges when pressure is indirect, not aggressive. People also hide the truth because they believe they are being evaluated. Evaluation creates performance, and performance creates distortion. The moment someone feels they must look good, smart, loyal, or innocent, honesty becomes secondary. Your role, if you seek truth, is to remove the sense of performance. This does not mean pretending you do not care. It means communicating, through tone and presence, that the truth itself is more important than how it reflects on them. When people feel they will not be emotionally punished for honesty, their cognitive load decreases. Lower cognitive load makes deception harder to maintain. Lies require energy. Truth requires release. Another reason people conceal the truth is because they are unsure of it themselves. Memory is not a recording. It is a reconstruction. Stress, trauma, and emotion distort recall. When someone hesitates, contradicts themselves, or appears vague, it does not automatically mean they are lying. It may mean they are sorting through fragmented information. Skilled truth seekers do not rush this process. They allow space for clarity to emerge. They ask fewer questions, but better ones. Questions that invite reflection rather than defense. Questions that slow the conversation instead of accelerating it. You must also understand the difference between secrecy and privacy. Not all withheld information is deception. People are entitled to boundaries. When you confuse privacy with dishonesty, you become intrusive, and intrusion triggers resistance. Ethical truth-seeking respects autonomy. The goal is not to strip someone bare, but to understand what is relevant, what is accurate, and what is necessary. This ethical stance is not just moral, it is practical. People cooperate more when they feel respected. They resist when they feel cornered. Respect lowers defenses more effectively than pressure ever could. The first psychological truth about truth is this: people tell the truth when they feel safe, not when they feel trapped. Safety does not mean comfort. It means predictability, emotional neutrality, and the absence of humiliation. When you provide these conditions, you do not need tricks. The mind naturally moves toward coherence. Humans dislike internal contradiction. When given the space to reconcile it without punishment, they often do so voluntarily. Pay attention to how people manage responsibility in their language. When someone avoids ownership, they often shift from I to we, from did to happened, from clear action to vague circumstance. This is not proof of deceit. It is evidence of discomfort with accountability. The truth is often hidden behind softened language. Your job is not to accuse, but to gently bring clarity back into focus. Precision invites honesty. Vagueness invites concealment. The way someone frames events tells you how safe they feel being exact. You must also understand that timing matters. Truth has a rhythm. Push too early, and you get resistance. Push too late, and the narrative becomes fixed. There is a moment when uncertainty is highest and defenses are lowest, usually right after an emotional peak or a cognitive pause. This is when the mind is recalibrating. Skilled observers recognize these windows. They do not interrupt them. They allow them to unfold. Patience is not passive, it is strategic. The desire to get the truth quickly often comes from anxiety, not necessity. When you rush, you communicate fear of what you might discover. This signals weakness. Calm curiosity signals strength. When you are not afraid of the answer, people sense it. They relax. And in that relaxation, truth leaks out in fragments through tone, timing, and choice of words. These fragments are more reliable than any single statement. Truth reveals itself cumulatively, not dramatically. People also lie to maintain social harmony. They tell small untruths to avoid conflict, disappointment, or emotional fallout. These lies are not malicious. They are relational. If you respond to them with confrontation, you escalate the stakes. If you respond with understanding, you reduce the need for continued distortion. When someone feels seen without being exposed, they often correct themselves. This self-correction is one of the most powerful indicators of honesty. It cannot be forced. It must be allowed. Your presence matters more than your questions. The nervous system reads microsignals constantly. Eye contact that is steady but not invasive. Posture that is open, not looming. Tone that is neutral, not loaded. These elements create an environment where the truth feels less dangerous. You are not trying to dominate the interaction. You are trying to stabilize it. Stability invites honesty because it reduces the perceived risk of collapse. One of the most overlooked aspects of truth-seeking is your willingness to hear answers you do not like. If someone senses that only one answer will be accepted, they will give you that answer, whether it is true or not. This is why leaders, parents, partners, and interrogators often receive filtered information. They have unknowingly trained others to lie by punishing honesty in the past. If you want the truth, you must prove, consistently, that truth is survivable in your presence. Truth is not extracted. It is revealed. It surfaces when psychological pressure is balanced with emotional restraint. Too little pressure, and there is no incentive to clarify. Too much pressure, and the mind retreats into defense. The balance is found in calm persistence, returning to the same point gently. allowing contradictions to exist without immediately resolving them, letting the other person hear themselves. Self-awareness is a powerful catalyst for honesty. The most important shift you can make is moving from suspicion to observation. Suspicion narrows your focus, observation widens it. When you observe, you notice patterns instead of isolated statements. You notice consistency across time. You notice when words align with behavior and when they do not. Truth is consistent even when it is uncomfortable. Lies require adjustment. The need for adjustment is where cracks form. At its core, getting the truth out of anyone begins with understanding the human need for dignity. People will protect their dignity at all costs. If telling the truth threatens that dignity, they will avoid it. If telling the truth preserves or restores it, they will move toward it. Your role is not to strip dignity away, but to separate it from the behavior or information in question. When people realize they can be honest without losing their sense of self, honesty becomes possible. This is the foundation. Before techniques, before cues, before communication strategies, there is mindset. A calm, disciplined, ethically grounded approach to truth-seeking is not just more effective, it is more human. When you understand why people hide the truth, you stop fighting them and start working with the realities of the human mind. And once you do that, the truth no longer feels like something you have to chase. It begins to come to you. Once you understand why people hide the truth, the next layer is learning how pressure naturally forms inside the human mind. Psychological pressure does not come from your words. It comes from internal conflict. When what someone knows clashes with what they are presenting, the nervous system reacts. Your role is not to create that conflict, but to recognize when it already exists. The body always reacts before language does. A pause that is slightly too long, an answer that is overly detailed, a sudden shift in tone. These are not accidental. They are moments when internal alignment falters. Truth-seeking begins when you notice these fractures without reacting to them emotionally. Behavioral cues are not magic signals that say, "This person is lying." They are indicators of cognitive load. Deception requires effort. It requires remembering what was said, predicting what might be asked next, and monitoring your reaction. This multitasking increases mental strain. Under strain, people simplify or overcompensate. Some become rigid and brief. Others flood the conversation with unnecessary context. Neither response proves dishonesty, but both signal pressure. Pressure is where truth becomes accessible, not because people want to reveal it, but because maintaining distortion becomes tiring. One powerful psychological pressure point is inconsistency over time. Truth remains stable even when emotions fluctuate. Fabrications drift. They gain or lose details depending on circumstance. When you hear something that does not align with what was previously stated, resist the urge to confront immediately. Confrontation invites defense. Instead, revisit the earlier point calmly, as if seeking clarity for yourself. When people are given the opportunity to reconcile inconsistency without accusation, they often expose the truth themselves through correction or discomfort. Another key pressure point lies in emotional mismatch. When words convey confidence but the body displays tension, something is unresolved. When someone claims indifference but their voice tightens, there is attachment. When someone expresses certainty but avoids eye contact only at specific moments, there is selective discomfort. These mismatches are not conscious decisions. They are involuntary. The body is not trying to deceive you, it is responding to internal stress. Your job is to observe patterns, not hunt for tells. People also reveal truth through what they avoid. Avoidance is more informative than denial. When a topic consistently gets redirected, minimized, or humorized, it carries emotional weight. The mind instinctively steers away from what feels threatening. Noticing avoidance tells you where to slow down, not where to push harder. Gentle persistence around avoided topics increases internal pressure without triggering defensive aggression. Pressure that builds slowly is more effective than pressure that strikes suddenly. Pay close attention to how people answer questions. Direct questions often produce indirect answers. This does not always mean deception. It often means uncertainty or fear of consequence. However, indirectness combined with precision in irrelevant areas can signal strategic evasion. When someone is extremely clear about details that do not matter and vague about those that do, they are managing perception. Perception management is cognitively expensive. The longer it continues, the more likely truth will leak through fatigue or contradiction. Another subtle pressure point is correction. Honest people correct themselves naturally. They pause, revise, clarify, and refine without prompting. Deceptive narratives resist correction because correction risks collapse. When someone becomes irritated or defensive when you simply restate their words and ask if you understood correctly, that irritation is informative. It suggests that the narrative is fragile. Calmly reflecting someone's own statements back to them is one of the most effective ways to reveal internal conflict. The pace of speech also matters. Truth does not require speed. Lies often do. Fast responses can indicate rehearsed material or anxiety about silence. Slow responses are not always honesty, but sudden changes in pace are meaningful. When someone answers most questions fluidly but hesitates noticeably on one point, their mind is shifting gears. That shift is where observation becomes valuable. Do not interrupt it. Silence amplifies pressure without aggression. You must also observe emotional spikes. Anger, humor, or excessive politeness can all be shields. Anger intimidates, humor deflects, politeness disarms suspicion. None of these are inherently dishonest, but when they appear selectively around certain subjects, they function as psychological armor. Armor appears where someone feels vulnerable. Vulnerability marks relevance. Relevance points toward truth. Another critical pressure point is responsibility transfer. When people distance themselves from actions by blaming circumstances, other people, or abstract forces, they are often protecting identity. Identity protection is one of the strongest motivators for concealment. When you hear repeated externalization, note it without judgment. The more someone distances themselves from agency, the more carefully you should observe their emotional reactions when agency is gently reintroduced into the conversation. Truth also reveals itself in emotional timing. Genuine emotion rises naturally and subsides gradually. Performed emotion appears abruptly and disappears just as quickly. Watch for emotions that seem switched on and off. This does not mean the emotion is fake, but it may be strategically deployed. Strategic emotion is another form of pressure management. It is used to steer your reaction away from scrutiny. Remaining emotionally neutral when this happens often causes the strategy to fail on its own. One of the most reliable indicators of honesty is cognitive ease. When someone is telling the truth, they can think and feel simultaneously. When they are managing distortion, thinking dominates and feeling becomes constrained or exaggerated. This imbalance shows up in flattened affect or overly dramatic expression. Again, this is not about judgment. It is about recognizing when the mind is working too hard. You must also watch how people respond to uncertainty. Truth can tolerate uncertainty. Honest individuals will say, "I don't know," "I'm not sure," or "I don't remember." Deception avoids uncertainty because uncertainty invites follow-up. Absolute statements can feel confident, but when used excessively, they often signal an attempt to close inquiry. When certainty appears where uncertainty would be natural, internal pressure is likely present. Environmental awareness matters as well. People behave differently depending on who is present, where they are, and what they believe is at stake. Truth-seeking requires situational awareness, not tunnel vision. Notice how someone's demeanor shifts when others enter or leave the room. Notice how their story adapts to the audience. Truth does not need to adapt. It remains structurally the same even when tone changes. Your own reactions also influence pressure. If you show surprise, approval, or disapproval too quickly, you alter the psychological landscape. Skilled observers maintain emotional consistency. This makes it harder for others to steer the interaction. When your reactions are predictable and neutral, people stop performing for you. Performance fades. authenticity becomes easier. Another overlooked pressure point is repetition. When someone repeats the same phrase or justification verbatim, they are anchoring themselves. Anchors are used when confidence is low. Truth does not require anchoring, it flows naturally. Repetition can be a self-soothing behavior or a stabilization attempt. Either way, it signals internal effort. Noting it helps you understand where the mental load is concentrated. At this stage, you are not extracting information. You are mapping the psychological terrain. You are identifying where tension accumulates, where energy spikes, where language becomes imprecise, and where emotion disconnects from content. This map tells you far more than any single answer ever could. It shows you where honesty is struggling to surface and where it flows freely. It is essential to remember that pressure alone does not produce truth. Pressure without emotional safety produces resistance. The cues and pressure points you observe are not tools for domination. They are signals guiding you toward a more skillful response. Your calm presence keeps pressure from becoming threat. Your restraint keeps observation from becoming accusation. Truth-seeking at this level requires humility. You must accept that you may be wrong. Misinterpreting cues is easy when ego is involved. This is why observation must remain open-ended. You are gathering data, not reaching verdicts. The goal is understanding, not victory. When you hold this mindset, people sense it. They lower their guard not because you outsmarted them, but because you did not try to overpower them. As pressure builds internally and safety remains externally intact, something shifts. The effort to maintain distortion becomes heavier than the perceived cost of honesty. This is the moment where disciplined communication becomes essential. Not forceful, not manipulative, disciplined. What you say next, and how you say it, determines whether truth finally emerges or retreats once more. When the moment arrives to speak, restraint matters more than brilliance. Disciplined communication is not about saying the perfect thing, it is about not saying the wrong thing. At this stage, the internal pressure has already been established, and safety has been maintained. Your words should not disrupt that balance. Calm language, slow pacing, and grounded tone act like stabilizers. They signal that the conversation can continue without escalation. When people feel that nothing terrible will happen if they are honest, honesty becomes a viable option rather than a threat. One of the most effective ways to encourage truth is to lower the emotional cost of it. This does not mean excusing behavior or minimizing consequences. It means separating information from judgment. When people believe that telling the truth will immediately lead to shame, attack, or loss of control, they will cling to distortion. When they believe the truth will simply be heard first, evaluated later, their nervous system relaxes. You are not negotiating outcomes yet. You are creating conditions for clarity. Clarity always precedes accountability. The language you use should invite reflection rather than defense. Statements are often more powerful than questions. A calm observation, spoken without accusation, allows the other person to respond without feeling cornered. When you say what you notice rather than what you suspect, you reduce resistance. Observation feels neutral. Suspicion feels hostile. This distinction determines whether the mind opens or closes. A person who feels observed can still choose honesty. A person who feels accused rarely does. Silence remains one of your strongest tools. After a reflective statement, resist the urge to fill the space. Let the other person process. Processing takes time, especially when someone is deciding whether to abandon a protective narrative. Silence creates a mirror. People often continue speaking simply to relieve internal tension. What follows silence is frequently closer to the truth than what came before it. This is not manipulation, it is patience. When clarification is needed, ask questions that focus on process rather than motive. Motive questions feel invasive and moralizing. Process questions feel practical and safe. Asking how something unfolded allows people to recount events without defending character. As they describe actions and sequences, inconsistencies either resolve or become visible. Truth does not fear sequence. Fabrication struggles with it. Let the story reveal itself through structure, not pressure. Avoid stacking questions. One question at a time maintains clarity and reduces overwhelm. Overwhelm increases cognitive load, which pushes people back toward rehearsed responses. Slow, deliberate pacing keeps the nervous system regulated. Regulation supports honesty. This is especially important when emotions surface. Emotional expression does not need to be interrupted or corrected. Allow it to move through. When emotion is acknowledged without being exploited, it often gives way to clarity. It is also critical to monitor your own internal state. If you feel a surge of satisfaction when someone stumbles or reveals something uncomfortable, you must recalibrate. That reaction, even if unspoken, leaks through microsignals. It tells the other person that honesty will be used against them. The goal is not exposure, it is understanding. When you remain steady, even in moments of revelation, you reinforce the idea that truth is manageable in your presence. There will be moments when the truth emerges indirectly. Partial admissions, softened language, or conditional statements often precede full honesty. Do not rush to correct or demand precision immediately. Allow the trajectory to continue. Truth unfolds in stages. Interrupting that process to demand clarity can cause retreat. Gentle reinforcement, acknowledging what was said without amplifying it, encourages continuation. When resistance appears, do not escalate. Resistance is information, not defiance. It tells you where fear still exists. Returning to neutrality restores balance. Sometimes the most effective move is to step back slightly, to shift the topic, or to pause the conversation altogether. Truth that is forced arrives distorted. Truth that is allowed arrives intact. Knowing when to pause is as important as knowing when to press. Ethics are not optional in truth-seeking. Techniques without integrity become coercion. The aim is not to corner someone into confession, but to create an environment where honesty feels like the least painful option. This distinction matters because people remember how they were treated long after they forget what was said. If truth comes at the cost of dignity, trust is destroyed. If truth comes through respect, trust often grows stronger, even in difficult circumstances. There will also be times when the full truth does not come. This is not failure. Some people are not ready, not safe, or not capable of complete honesty in a given moment. Accepting this reality protects you from frustration and ego-driven persistence. Partial truth is still data. Silence is still information. Your job is not to force resolution, but to remain perceptive and composed. The most powerful signal you can send is consistency. When people see that your tone, boundaries, and reactions remain stable across conversations, they adjust their behavior accordingly. Consistency reduces uncertainty. Reduced uncertainty lowers defenses. Over time, people volunteer more information without being asked. This is how trust-based truth emerges, not dramatically, but gradually. Ultimately, getting the truth out of anyone is less about influence and more about self-mastery. Your calm regulates the room. Your restraint shapes the interaction. Your ethics determine the outcome. When you are grounded, observant, and patient, the human mind does what it naturally wants to do. It resolves internal conflict. Honesty is not foreign to us. It is suppressed, delayed, or distorted under pressure, but it seeks release. When you stop trying to outsmart people and start understanding them, the dynamic changes. Truth no longer feels like something you must extract. It becomes something that surfaces because the conditions are right, and when that happens, you gain more than information. You gain credibility, authority, and a quiet confidence that does not rely on dominance. This is the deeper skill. Not control, but clarity. Not force, but presence. When you master these principles, you do not just hear the truth more often. You become someone to whom the truth is naturally told.